ready.
Oh, Sadie.
Okay, what in the world's taking it so long?
Oh, I gotta pause mine.
Gotcha.
All right, gotcha. We are live.
We are live. Welcome everybody to episode number 3 of Ghostly Stories, brought to you by Half Past Dead Paranormal Radio, with your host Roger Belt and my lovely partner Christina Corzelli.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello, hello. Okay, you guys, I can't remember, so I'm gonna let the audience decide. The first story that I had for tonight was Axe Murder Hollow, and I can't remember if I did that one last time or the time before that. So if you guys remember, if I did, let me know, and we will skip it. Yeah, you look, aren't I just adorable? Anyway, Axe Murder Hollow, did I or didn't I? Okay, we're gonna do it anyway. The story is called Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and came to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. Okay, they got me sidetracked over talking about poking my eyes out. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud," he said. "I'm going to have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the doors. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Suddenly, the axe-wielding spirit of the... What? Suddenly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth to the thump against a tree, bump, bump, bump. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. "Playing around when my back was turned," the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp edge of the axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie incandescent light.
Wow.
Ooh. Now, like I said, I don't remember. It seems that I did that one, but I can't remember for sure. And since no one said that I did, anyway, I hope y'all like that one. Christina is going to entertain us with Big Liz.
Sure thing. Big Liz. The master of the plantation was a firm supporter of the Confederate president and had committed to send as much food as he could to the Southern Army. Things were going well at first, until the Yankees began attacking the master supply lines. The master suspected a traitor among his slaves and soon discovered that the Yankee spy was a slave woman named Big Liz. She was a behemoth of a girl who could pick up 2 full-grown pigs, one under each arm, and cart them over to the slaughterhouse without assistance. If he confronted her directly and she fought back, she would take him to pieces. So the master came up with a different plan to rid himself of the spy. He approached the giant girl and asked her to assist him with a special task. He told her that President Jefferson Davis had entrusted him with a large chest full of gold. To keep it out of Yankees' hands, he wanted to bury the chest where it would never be found. The girl's eyes gleamed when she heard this false report. The master knew she was already planning to betray the existence of the chest to the Yankees. The master made Big Liz carry the heavy trunk several miles out into the swampland and asked her to dig a deep hole for the trunk. He sat at his leisure while she worked and strained for hours against the muddy ground, which kept oozing back into the hole. When the slave girl was completely exhausted, the master decreed the hole to be large enough for his war chest. Warily, Big Liz dropped the shovel and pulled the heavy chest down until it lay at her feet. Then she started to climb out of the deep hole, but the master barred her way, and Big Liz gazed up at him in sudden fear as he loaned over her. "Traitor, Yankee spy," the master hissed. "There's only one path open to a traitor." The master swung his sword at her, and the sharp edge of the blade cut clean through the slave girl's neck. Her head went rolling away into the tall grass as her body toppled across the chest. The master heaped dirt over the chest and the body of the slave girl who had betrayed him. Briefly, he considered finding her head and burying it in the pit with their body, but it was too dark to go wandering in the dangerous marshland, and he knew that scavengers could make short work of the head when they found it. As the master walked toward home through the dark swamp, he became aware of a prickly sensation at the back of his neck, as if someone were watching him. The master walked faster as clouds obscured the light of the moon. The master's teeth chattered as a breeze cut through him like a sharpened blade of the sword at his side, and his straining ears picked up the sounds of footsteps on the path behind him. The master was filled with a terrible, superstitious dread of demons and witches and ghosts. He broke out into a panic run, fleeing up the path as fast as his legs could carry him. To his relief, he saw the lights of his house rise before him, and he knew he was home. As he rounded the back corner of his house, he was confronted by a massive, dirt-encrusted figure that glowed with blue fire. The smell of rotten leaves and marsh grass filled his nostrils as his eyes raced up and up the tall creature until they rested on the stump of its neck, where the head had resided only an hour before. Then he heard a chuckle from the creature's side, and he saw the phantom head tucked under her arm. The master stumbled backwards, gasping desperately in fear as the ghost placed her head upon the ground with one hand and grabbed the collar of his shirt with the other. The murdered slave girl snapped the master's neck in two and dropped his dead body to the ground beneath his bedroom window. Then Big Liz gathered up her severed head and vanished into the darkness. They say on the anniversary of her death, the ghost of Big Liz still may be seen roaming the swamplands near her old home. Anyone foolish enough to walk near her grave will be driven away by the phantom, which to this day still defends the place where the Confederate chest is buried.
Ooh. I like it. So I wonder what was really in the chest, though.
Didn't it say?
Well, he told her it was gold, but it probably wasn't, but he must have put rocks or something in there for it to be heavy, to feel like it had gold in it.
Yeah.
But you never know what was in there. I like this story. Don't sell my house. Life seemed perfect to Mark when the widower brought his new bride, Lisa, home to the lovely two-story cottage he had built for his deceased first wife. Things were very happy for about a year, and Mark was ecstatic when he learned Lisa was expecting twins. The house was rather small for a double addition to the family, so Mark and Lisa put the cottage up for sale and started searching for a bigger home. That's when the problems began. Suddenly, the cottage would be filled with the distinctive smell of expensive perfume. The first time Mark smelled it, he turned pale and told Lisa that it was the scent his dead wife had favored. Then furniture that Lisa had rearranged moved back to its original place. The books in Mark's study were taken out of their categories and put in alphabetical order the way his former wife had kept them. The ghost of Mark's first wife had returned to the little cottage, but why now, a full year after he remarried? One afternoon, Lisa was down in the basement doing laundry while Mark was out front discussing the sale of the cottage with their attorney. They had just received a generous bid on the house and had decided to accept it. When Lisa finished emptying the washing machine, she turned to go back upstairs and saw a young woman floating a foot above the staircase. "This is my house. Don't sell my house," the woman said. Her pretty face transformed with rage. She shook her fist at Lisa. Lisa shrieked, dropped the basket of wet laundry, and ran outside. Slamming the basement door behind her, Lisa locked it and sat down on the lawn, gasping for breath. All at once, the basement door started shaking violently as if someone were pushing against it. "Don't sell my house," the phantom exclaimed again, shaking the door. "If you sell my house, something terrible will happen to your family. Don't sell my house." The roar of a car engine pierced the ghost's words as the attorney bade Mark goodbye and drove away. Immediately, the shaking and pounding ceased, as if the departure of the hated real estate attorney had momentarily appeased the ghost. When Lisa described the ghost, Mark recognized her as his dead wife. Until then, he had forgotten what he promised his wife, that he would never sell the cottage. Mark and Lisa tried to appease the ghost by bringing in a priest to pray over the cottage. But the house continued to be filled with the choking smell of expensive perfume. Lisa was afraid for her unborn babies, living in such a haunted atmosphere. After much discussion, Mark and Lisa decided to defy the phantom and sell the cottage. On the night following the family's move, Lisa was struck with a terrible pain in her abdomen. Mark rushed her to the hospital, where she gave birth to the twins who were stillborn.
Aww.
On his way home from the hospital, Mark's car was struck by a truck and he was killed instantly. At the same moment, Lisa sat bolt upright in her hospital bed, staring at an empty corner of the room. She screamed once in terror at the sight of the phantom floating before her eyes. Then she died instantly from a brain aneurysm.
Oh, wow.
So, in other words, don't sell my freaking house.
Basically. Now, these are urban legends, aren't they?
Huh?
These are urban legends, aren't they?
No, it's just a ghost story, but
Well, I know the first one, you know, and the next one, Express Train to Hell, that's an urban legend that I posted before. I was just curious.
But
They're ghostly stories.
they can go either or, I guess.
Yeah. Because I know the first one was definitely true.
And they're good though. It doesn't really matter if it's a legend or a ghost story. It kind of fits both categories,
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I like this story too. So, tell us about the Express Train to Hell.
Okay. Well, the Express Train to Hell, for days, a ragged old man had hung around the Newark Central Station. The station master kept running him off, but night after night he would return. He kept accosting people, shouting, "It's coming for me, it's coming." Whenever anyone asked him what was coming for him, he would just clutch his head and cry, "I done wrong. I killed a man that cheated me at cards, and now I'm going to pay." The station master finally took the man aside and threatened to call the police if he did not cease and desist. The old man rolled his eyes and replied, "The express train for hell is coming for my soul. You've got to help me." He broke away from the station master and ran for the door. The time was 2 minutes to midnight. At that moment, new sound introduced itself. A long whistle blew, once, twice. The station master was startled. The next train wasn't due until 12:05. The old tramp started screaming when he heard the whistle. The station master could hear the roar and chug of a steam train approaching too fast to stop at the station. The old man was standing at the edge of the platform, staring down in the tracks in frozen terror. The station master ran forward and grabbed hold of the old tramp to pull him out of harm's way. The train's whistle sounded again. A warm rush of air blew against everyone near the platform, and the station master heard the roar of an invisible train passing directly in front of him. He heard the hiss of the steam and the screech of the flanges against iron rails. He felt the wind whipping out our hair and faces, but he saw nothing. Beneath his grip, the old tramp gave a terrible wail. Then he vanished, leaving the station master empty-handed. The roar of the invisible train faded into the distance and then ceased. The station master glanced at the station clock. It was midnight. The station master stared blankly at the tracks. Around him, the waiting passengers and other bystanders were gasping and murmuring in fright. Good Lord, he was right, the station master murmured to himself. It did come for him. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his sweating bald head with it. A trembling man standing nearby approached the station master. "Sir, what was that?" he asked. "Son, I believe that was the express train to hell," said the station master. He shook his head, and that seemed to bring him to his senses. "Why don't you go back into the station and pour yourself a drink?" he suggested to the trembling man. He pushed the man through the station door and then turned to address the dazed and frightened passengers. "Nothing to worry about, folks," he said. "It was just an express train passing through. The next train will be here in 5 minutes." The station master's reassuring manner calmed everyone. People turned away from the empty tracks and settled back into their seats, whispering to each other about the strange events that had just taken place. Then the station master went into his office, closed the door, poured himself a stiff drink to calm his nerves. "Well, that one's for the books," he muttered aloud. "I wonder if I should put it on the schedule, 12 a.m. express train to hell." Shaking his head, he fortified himself with one more brandy and then went back to work.
Yeah, he should put that one on the schedule, right?
Yeah.
Okay. 50-cent piece. Listen to the story. There is a story told in Troy and Albany about a couple returning home from a trip to New England. They were driving home in a carriage and were somewhere near Spiegelton when the light failed and they knew they would have to seek shelter for the night. The husband spied a light through the trees and turned their horse into a small lane leading up a hill. A pleasant little house stood at the crest, and an old man and his wife met the couple at the door. They were in night clothes and were obviously about to turn in, but they welcomed the travelers and offered them a room. The old woman bustled about, making tea and offering freshly baked cakes. Then the travelers were shown to their room. The husband wanted to pay the old couple for their lodgings, but the old lady shook her head and the old man refused any payment for such a small service to their fellow New Yorkers. The travelers awoke early and tiptoed out of the house, leaving a shiny 50-cent coin in the center of the kitchen table, where the old couple could not miss it. The husband hitched up the horse and they went a few miles before they broke their fast at a little restaurant in Spiegelton. The husband mentioned the nice old couple to the owner of the restaurant and the man turned pale. "Where did you say that house was?" he asked. The husband described the location in detail. "You must be mistaken," said the restaurant owner. "That house was destroyed 3 years ago by a fire that killed the Brown family." "I don't believe it," the husband said flatly. "Mr. and Mrs. Brown were alive and well last night." After debating for a few more minutes, the couple and the restaurant owner drove the carriage back out of town towards the old Brown place. They turned into the lane, which was overgrown with weeds, and climbed the hill to the crest. They found a burnt out shell of a house that had obviously not sheltered anyone for a long time. "I must have missed the track," said the husband, and then his wife gave a terrified scream and fainted into his arms. As he caught her, the husband looked into the ruin and saw a burnt table with a shiny 50-cent piece laying in the center.
Interesting.
That.
That's interesting.
As y'all can tell by this that I like stories about ghost trains or nothing.
Oh, absolutely. We all live for the paranormal.
Okay, the next story up is Ghost Train.
Ghost train.
Tell us about the ghost train.
Okay. I was a railway fireman back in those days, working on a CPR line in Alberta. I did a hard day's work and earned me a fair wage. I was young then, and my pretty little bride was just setting up housekeeping in a little cottage that was all we could afford. Life was good, and I thought everything would continue rolling along that way. Well, then came that fateful day in May of 1908. I was working nights at that month, and my buddy, Tui, was the engineer. We were about 3 kilometers out of the Medicine Hat when a blazing light appeared in the front of the engine. It was another train on a collision course with us. Tui yelled at me to jump, but there was no time. The light was right on top of us. I thought we were dead. Then the oncoming train veered off to the right and ran past us. Its whistle blowing and the passengers staring at us through the windows. But there was only a single track in that stretch of hills, and it was that one we were on. So I looked over at the shrieking, rumbling ghost train and saw that the wheels were not touching the ground. Well, we were mighty spooked by the incident. Tui decided to take some time off from engineering and began working in the yard. But I kept working the night shift as a fireman, not wanting some ghost train to drive me away at a job I enjoyed. A few weeks later, I was stoking the fire for an engineer named Nicholson when we heard the shrill whistle blast through the calm night air. We were on the same single track just outside of Medicine Hat, and the brilliant light of the ghost train burst out of nowhere, blinding us. Nicholson gave a shout of terror as I thought my heart would stop. As before the ghost train veered off to the right at the last possible second, I saw it race past us on tracks that did not exist, its passengers staring curiously at Nicholson and I from out of the windows. That did it. I wasn't about to go back on the tracks after that. I did yard work for the rest of the month of May and a few weeks in June. Finally, I decided that enough was enough, and I gritted my teeth and resumed my role as fireman. I was firing up the engine in the yard one evening in early July when the report of an accident came in. The Spoken Flyer and the Lethbridge passenger train had a head-on collision on the single track 3 kilometers outside of Medicine Hat, on the exact spot where the ghost train had appeared. The Lethbridge locomotive had derailed and its baggage car was destroyed. 7 people were killed in the accident, including 2 engineers. One was my buddy Tui, and the other was Nicholson. Ooh, that was a good one.
Yeah.
I like that one.
He decided to quit firing up the trains just in time, didn't he?
Yep.
Okay. Now, this one's kind of funny, you guys. So, like I said, you got to have a little fun with the rest of the stuff, okay? This one's called Gone Courting. Jay Dawson had 2 goals in life: to find a rich vein of gold and to find a bride. So far, he hadn't had any luck either with the gold or the ladies. His smooth Eastern manners seemed rather sissy and irritating among the rough miners and rowdy of the other entertainers at the saloon, all to no avail. Then one day, Jay Dawson's lifeless body was found at the bottom of a cliff. He had fallen several hundred feet off the mountain where he was prospecting for gold. He was buried in Buckskin Cemetery with a small service, and everyone forgot about him. Until 2 days after the funeral, the sheriff found the remains of Jay Dawson in the local saloon, lying in the bed of a lady of the evening that he had courted a few months back. She had been sleeping off another busy night when she awoke to find Jay Dawson's remains beside her. The sheriff calmed the hysterical woman and then took Jay Dawson back to the graveyard to bury him again. Naturally, no one knew anything. The miners avowed their innocence, and the shopkeepers and poor old Jay Dawson. 3 days later, Jay Dawson was found at the schoolhouse. He was propped against the doorpost, a love note addressed to the teacher in his hand. After being dead a week, he was not a pretty sight. The sheriff removed the corpse a second time and had the body buried as deeply as possible. He piled heavy stones atop the grave, and Jay Dawson remained in his grave for several weeks. Then came a spate of activity. Jay Dawson was found sitting on the porch of the local advocate's house, clutching flowers with a note addressed to the eldest daughter. Next, he was found sitting on his favorite bar stool with a box of sweets addressed to one of the pretty lady entertainers. He visited several prosperous businessmen's daughters with love letters and banquets of bouquets of wildflowers. Finally, the sheriff hired a couple of local boys to watch the grave. One night, the boy roused the sheriff from his bed. He came up out of the grave, I swear. It was Jay Dawson. He came out of the grave and started picking wildflowers. The boy was hysterical and wouldn't calm down till the sheriff went out went to the graveyard and saw for himself that the earth of J. Dawson's grave was disturbed. The next morning, the sheriff found the rotting corpse at the home of his own sweetheart, and that was the last straw. I have had enough of his shenanigans, the sheriff said. If he is going to behave like he belongs in a cesspool, then that's is where he belongs. The sheriff grabbed the smoldering body of J. Dawson and dragged it down the road to an old outhouse that stood near an abandoned shantytown. He ripped off the wooden seat and threw J. Dawson down into the muck. Then he tore down the outhouse and buried J. Dawson inside. That was the last time J. Dawson ever went courting. I love that one. That's funny. Now, how would you like to wake up and have a dead, rotten corpse sitting on your doorstep with a love note and a bouquet of wildflowers?
I think it'd be cool. I'd be taking pictures with that.
Mary J. Dawson's coming to visit you tomorrow.
There you go.
That was funny.
All right. So next we have Jack and the Devil.
I did have one. I did have a devil story in there. See, I didn't think I did, but I do.
Yep. Jack was a nasty fellow who beat his wife and kids and was an all-around bad chap. So the devil came and hauled the poor fellow away with him. On their way to hell, Jack asked the devil if he was thirsty. And old Lucifer said he was. So Jack somehow persuaded the devil to turn himself into a coin so Jack could buy them both a drink from the handy tavern. Only Jack stuck the devil into his coin purse, which had a cross on it, and wouldn't let the devil out until he agreed to give Jack another 12 months of living. The devil didn't have much choice in the matter unless he wanted to live forever in a coin purse, so he agreed, and Jack let him out. Jack went back to his wicked ways, figuring he'd repent and get religion during the second half of his stolen year, and that would be good enough to keep the devil away. Only Jack kept putting off the time when he changed his ways until one day he opened the door and found the devil on his threshold. Away went Jack and the devil, going down to hell. When they passed a great big tree full of apples, Jack asked the devil if he could get some of the fruit for a snack to eat on their way to perdition. The devil agreed. So Jack gave the devil a lift into the branches so he could pick them some fruit. Once the devil was up in the tree, Jack whipped out his jackknife and carved a cross in the bark so he could not come down. "Let me down," shouted the devil. But Jack wouldn't let him down until the devil promised to never come after him no more. Then Jack rubbed out the cross carved in the bark until you couldn't see it, and the devil was free. The devil stomped off without another word, and Jack could do as he pleased from then on. Well, Jack got worse and worse as the years rolled by, but all good things come to an end, and Jack's body got so wore out that he died. Jack's spirit went straight to the pearly gates. But St. Peter refused to let such a wretched fellow into heaven, so Jack was forced to go down to hell. But the devil barred the door as soon as he saw Jack coming and wouldn't let him into hell either. "Go away and don't come back," the devil told Jack. "Go back where you came from." "How am I supposed to get back in the dark?" Jack grumbled. "Give me a lantern." The devil threw a chunk of molten fire out to Jack, who took it for his lantern and went back to Earth, where he wanders forever through the swamps and marshlands of Earth, a bitter spirit whose only delight is in luring the unwary to their doom with his light.
Kind of reminds you of, I don't know if you ever read that story about Daniel Webster and the devil, or the devil and Daniel Webster.
I know, yeah.
A long time ago. Well, it was sort of similar. You know, he tricks the devil into something or another.
Something or other.
Yeah, where he doesn't, I guess, where he doesn't go to hell or what have you.
I'd rather walk the earth than go to hell. Wouldn't you think so?
Man, depends.
I know I would.
You know, I mean, if you could walk the earth as just an average spirit, you know, and do what you wanted and everything, yeah. But you know, if you were doomed to suffer and kind of like a hell on earth type thing, no.
No, I just think I think you'd be able to do anything you want. That's what I thought.
I don't know. Well, according to that, Jack didn't get to have no fun.
Yeah, that's true.
He just lured people to their doom because he was a miserable asshole.
Yeah.
We got another train story. Yay! Lincoln Death Train. I've been transferred to the Hudson Division of the New York Central System and was working the rails on the main line between New York and Albany. I was on the late shift to start with since I was a bit of a night owl. After 6 weeks of stomping the tracks and mending the rails, I was feeling right at home in my new job. Then just before midnight on a clear spring night in late April, we got a report of some brush on the track near our station. I was sent out immediately to clear it away before the next train came. I had nearly an hour before the next train, and so I did not hurry as I walked along the rails. It was surprisingly pleasant and rather warm. Overhead, the clouds were obscuring the moon, but the light from my lantern made a cheerful glow in the night. Suddenly, a chilly wind swept over the rails with a whoosh like a wind just before a thunderstorm. It was so strong that it nearly knocked me over. I staggered backwards, swearing and windmilling my arms to try to keep my balance. I almost dropped the lantern, but managed to get my balance just before it slipped out of my hand. Shivering in the sudden cold, I squinted down the track and saw a huge blanket of utter darkness rolling toward me. It blanked out the rails, the trees, the sky, everything. Good Lord, what is that? I gasped. I leapt away from the track and started to run back toward the station. But the darkness swept up and over me before I had moved a yard. The lantern in my hand was snuffed out instantly. I stopped, unable to see more than a few paces around me. To my right, the rails began to gleam with a strange blue light. I staggered backwards from the tracks, my pulses pounding in fear and dread. What was going on? Then the headlight of a train pierced the thick darkness. It gleamed blue-white in the strange black fog, and when it appeared, the rails brightened in response. A huge steam engine draped in black creep approached, stacks bellowing forth a steady stream of smoke. The brass on the engine gleamed, and it pulled several flat cars along behind it. I stared into the windows of the engine but couldn't see any crew. Just at the edge of hearing came the faint sound of music and turned to look at the flat cars behind the engine. I gasped and backed up so far that I bumped into the trunk of a tree growing near the tracks. There was a glowing orchestra of skeletons seated in a semicircle. They were playing a nearly soundless funeral dirge on glowing black instruments. A violinist played passionately. A skeleton lifted a flute to its lipless mouth. A lone drummer sat waiting patiently for his cue from the skeletal conductor. Then the orchestra was gone, and another glowing headlight pierced the blackness. I was trying unsuccessfully to push my way through the bark of the tree by this time. Another black creep draped train was approaching, a funeral train. I thought again there was no one manning the engine, and no one appeared on the black car behind it. The only thing there was a single black crepe draped coffin, but swirling in the air around the train were the ghostly figures of soldiers dressed in the blue uniforms worn by the North during the Civil War. They lined up before my eyes, saluting the solitary coffin as it passed. Some of the ghosts staggered under the weight of their own coffins. Some limped on one leg or sat in a wheelchair legless. Their eyes were fixed upon the flat car and the black creped coffin. Then they were joined by soldiers from the Southern Army, and all these lads saluted too, honoring the one who had fallen. That's when I knew what I was seeing. This was the funeral train of Abraham Lincoln. I straightened up and saluted myself, having done a bit for the North many years ago. The steam train moved slowly away, and with it went the darkness and the chill and the clouds that had obscured the moon. In my hand, the lantern sprang back to life. I blinked a few times and brushed away a tear. As the world around me brightened, I saw the reported brush littering the tracks right in front of me. Mechanically, I cleared it away and made sure the track was safe for the next train. Then I went back to the station. The next morning, all the clocks on the Hudson Division were 6 minutes behind, and all the trains were running 6 minutes late. When I asked the station master about it, he shook his head and told me not to worry. It was caused by the Lincoln Death Train, which had stopped time as it ran by in the night.
Huh. The
Interesting.
Lincoln Death Train.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
All right, let's see. We
Mary
have
said Meg's a tiny Irish woman with a big Irish temper. Okay, you guys. And see, I was worried that 10 was going to be too many.
Oh yeah, I mean, we still have what?
And we still
one more.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
We got one story.
Oh, you were right, Roger.
Yeah, see,
You were right. Now you know what I mean? Learning experience.
so now you know. I should have had at least a couple more.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, what do we got next? We have never mind.
Yeah, we're gonna leave you guys with a funny one for our ending. For our night's ending story. It's called "Never Mind Them Watermelons."
Never mind them watermelons. All right. Well, now old Sam Gib, he didn't believe in ghosts, not one bit. Everyone in town knew the old log cabin back in the woods was haunted, but Sam Gibbs just laughed whenever folks talked about it. Finally, the blacksmith dared Sam Gib, to spend the night in the haunted log cabin. If he stayed there until dawn, the blacksmith would buy him a whole cartload of watermelons. Sam was delighted. Watermelon was Sam's absolute favorite fruit. He accepted the dare at once, packed some matches in his pipe, and went right over to the log cabin to spend the night. Excuse me. Sam went into the old log cabin, started a fire, lit his pipe, and settled into a rickety old chair with yesterday's newspaper. As he was reading, he heard a creaking sound. Looking up, he saw that a gnarled little creature with glowing red eyes had taken the seat beside him. It had a long forked tail, 2 horns on its head, claws at the end of its hands, and sharp teeth that poked right through his large lip. There ain't nobody here tonight except you and me, the creature said to old Sam Gib. It had a voice like the hiss of flames. Sam's heart nearly stopped with fright. He leapt to his feet. "There ain't going to be no one here but you in a minute," Sam Gib told the gnarled creature. He leapt straight for the nearest exit, which happened to be the window, and he hightailed it down the lane lickety-split. Then he ran so fast he overtook two rabbits being chased by a coyote. But it wasn't long before he heard the pounding of little hoofs, and the gnarled creature with the red eyes caught up with him. "You're making pretty good speed for an old man," said the creature to old Sam Gib. "Oh, I can run much faster than this," Sam Gib told it, and he took off like a bolt of lightning, leaving the gnarled creature in the dust. As he ran past the smithy, the blacksmith came flying out of the forge to see what was wrong. "Never mind about them watermelons," Sam Gib shouted to the blacksmith without breaking his stride. Old Sam Gib ran all the way home and hid under his bed for the rest of the night. After that, he was a firm believer in ghosts and spooks, and he refused to go anywhere near the old cabin in the woods. Never mind about them watermelons.
Yeah, never mind about your watermelons. Okay. See, we're 15 minutes short. Man, I'm telling you. You know what, though?
What?
It's not a big deal. I mean, because I can grab one quicker than you can bat an eye. And I tell you what, let's just do that. Let me see it here real quick, like. I need something.
My horn just went boop.
Somewhere over the rainbow.
I like my horns. They fit me perfectly.
You like your horns, huh?
They do.
I gotta find something here interesting real quick. Let me see. There's an okay. Since we're into train stories tonight, I got another train story called The Phantom Train Wreck.
Ooh, okay.
The passengers were grumpy and heavy-eyed as they boarded the train in Salisbury during the early morning of August 27th, 1891. The train was headed to Asheville, and the riders settled into their seats and tried to catch a few more minutes of sleep. Around 3 a.m., the passengers were suddenly awakened by suddenly bucking and rocking of the train. The engineer fought for control as the passenger train raced across the stone and brick Bostain Bridge near Statesville. But the train suddenly derailed. The chug and whoosh of the rushing train was replaced by the scream of metal and the sounds of huge train falling down towards the creek bed 60 feet below the bridge. The horrible thunder of the train as it smashed into the stream was quickly replaced by the equally terrible sound of trapped passengers screaming and moaning in agony as the twisted wreckage of the train was encompassed by the waters of the creek. 22 people were killed that night in the worst train wreck in the history of North Carolina. 50 years to the day after the wreck, a woman waiting by her stranded car near the Bostain Bridge in the early morning hours of August 27th saw a train come rushing down the track, its headlight gleaming brightly in the darkness and the whistle blowing. As it raced across the bridge, it suddenly derailed, screaming its way down and down 60 feet to smash into the creek bed below. The woman was terrified. She ran toward the wrecked train and gazed down into the creek. She could hear the frantic cries and agonized moans of the survivors. At that moment, a car pulled up beside her stranded vehicle, and her husband jumped out, followed by the owner of a local store who had come to help them fix the flat tire. She ran towards them in a frenzy, desperate to go get help down to the poor trapped passengers below. When they heard her story, the men ran to the edge and looked down into the creek bed. There was nothing there. The woman had seen the train wreck of Statesville reenacted before her eyes. Some people say the phantom train appears each year in the early morning of August 27th and is wrecked before the eyes of anyone who will watch for it. How about that?
Pretty cool.
How about that? Damn, we need one more, don't we? Okay, let me see. Do. There's another train one. Want to do another train one?
Sure.
Okay, this is called Shadow Train. A miner was on his way to Das Cabezas, where he heard there was good prospecting. When he found himself lost and alone in the flats just north of the Dragoon Mountains. In the blistering sun of midday, his burro dropped dead from heat stroke, and the prospector knew that he would shortly follow if he did not find shelter and something to drink. The landscape wobbled before his eyes, and he staggered forward, determined not to drop. But the heat of the desert flats seeped deep into his body, and he found his wits wandering. The last sensible thought that crossed his mind before he collapsed was the sorrow his mother would feel when he did not return home from his wanderings. He was awakened by a steady chug-chug sound. He raised his head from the hard and dusty ground and looked blurrily around him. It sounded like a train was approaching, but that was impossible. There were no tracks in this inhospitable location and no town for miles. Clackety-clack, clackety-clack, the sound came again, louder this time. Chug, chug, chug. Then the hiss of steam from an engine. He was hallucinating, he decided. The miner laid his head on his arms and waited for death to come. As he broiled in the heat, he seemed to hear the words the old-timer from whom he had learned of the good prospecting sites in the north. The grizzled man had spoken of a shadow train that had come bursting out of nowhere and ran just above the flats where no railroad tracks had ever lain. The shadow train had sped across the desert before his eyes, a dark smudge against the dazzling light of noonday. It had vanished into the distance while the old man watched, wavering into mirage and then vanishing into the dazzle of the sun. At the time, the young miner had thought the old man was a bit of a nut. It was an illusion caused by heat stroke, he assumed. But with the steady chug, chug, chug growing louder in his ears, he was not so sure. He raised his head again and saw a black speck, dark as the deepest shadow, approaching rapidly. He heard the sharp whistle of a train once, twice. The speck grew larger, and he could make out the shape of a black steam engine pulling two cars. A yellow headlight gleamed oddly in the white hot glare of the sun. The whistle sounded sharply again as the train hurtled toward him. The young miner wanted to leap out of its path, but his body was too far gone. He could not even lift himself. He closed his eyes and braced for the impact. But the train slowed suddenly and stopped just a few feet from his head. A jolly-faced conductor stepped out of the train and came over to him. The conductor bent down and lifted him from the ground. Someone else whom he couldn't see caught his feet, and he was carried inside a passenger car. He felt himself laid down in the aisle, and kind faces surrounded him. Water, he gasped faintly just before losing consciousness. He was wakened by the feeling of cold waters moved onto his face, he opened his eyes and saw a tall man wearing a sheriff's badge carefully trickling water from a pitcher over him. The man put down the pitcher and held a cup to his lips, careful not to give him too much water at once. The miner had to swish the water around his swollen tongue several times before he could swallow. When he was finally able to speak, he asked the sheriff what had happened. "Fellow found you nearly dead about 5 miles out of town," the sheriff answered laconically, whatever kind of word that is. "What town?" asked the young prospector cautiously, visions of shadow trains and jolly conductors in his head. The sheriff looked at him strangely. "The sun sure must have messed with your head, son, if you can't even remember where you was headed," said the sheriff. "You're in Wilcox, Arizona." "It's a stop on the train then?" he asked hesitantly. "Train? There ain't no train around for miles," said the sheriff. "You better have some more water and rest a bit. The sun's nearly sent you loco." The young miner lay back down thankfully and closed his eyes. He wasn't sure why the shadow train had come to his rescue, but he was sure glad it had stopped for him. Years later, the Southern Pacific Railroad put a track right through Wilcox, Arizona, and real trains started rolling through Arizona, but some say the shadow train still races through the flats at midday where no tracks was ever laid.
Ooh.
And that, ladies and germs, I think is going to be the last one for the night. We got about 4 minutes left. We did pretty good. I hope you guys enjoyed.
I had fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming around to help me out with this.
Very welcome.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. And as I said, Monday, Christina, if she chooses, may go ahead and do Paranormal Graveyard.
Yeah, no, I am.
I will be in Memphis at the hospital while my wife's having surgery, so I won't be here. And I may not be back by Wednesday. I'm not sure. Janice Brunner was supposed to be on Half Past Dead this coming Wednesday. If you want to interview her, that's cool. If not, you know, we can reschedule it for another time. If I don't make it back, that is, we don't get back by then, because I figure we'll probably be there at least a couple of days. And anyways,
yeah, no, I'll be doing Paranormal Graveyard. We have Immortals, Never Ending Life.
right.
I'll be doing that solo, so everyone can prepare for that. Absolutely.
So you guys tune in for that on the 11th with Christina, and I will be back eventually. I don't know, like I said, how long we're going to be down there, how long they're going to keep her after the surgery. So maybe I figure it'll be at least a couple of days.
Well, good luck to her and you, you know.
All you people in the chat room, you guys rock. We appreciate you so much. Everybody that's listening in who is not in the chat room, we appreciate all of you too. And Christina will be seeing you guys on Monday.
Yep.
And I will be seeing you guys when I return. So until then, adios, everybody. We appreciate it. And we will say good night.